Millionaire humiliates poor wife, but fate gives him a surprise he never imagined. Hello, let's start another beautiful story. Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's go. The Manhattan skyline glittered like scattered diamonds against the evening sky, a view that James Carter had paid millions to own. From his penthouse office on the 68th floor, he stood with a glass of scotch in hand, watching the city lights flicker to life as dusk settled over New York. The corporate giant's reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows showed a man in his early 40s, impeccably dressed in a custom Tom Ford suit, with steel-grey eyes that had mastered the art of intimidation. Behind him, the sounds of the charity gala he was hosting filled the air, crystal glasses clinking, polite laughter, and the soft murmur of Manhattan's elite discussing their latest acquisitions. It was the type of event James had perfected over the years, exclusive, elegant, and designed to remind everyone present of their place in the social hierarchy. His eyes narrowed as he caught sight of his wife, Olivia, attempting to engage in conversation with the wife of a prominent hedge fund manager. Even from this distance, he could see her struggling, the slight nervousness in her posture, the way she clutched her champagne glass a bit too tightly, the uncertain smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Your wife seems charming." Regina Walsh, one of his board members, appeared beside him with a knowing smirk. Though perhaps a bit out of her depth, James took another sip of his scotch, letting the expensive liquid burn away the hint of shame that tried to surface. "She's a temporary distraction," he replied coldly. "Nothing more." Regina raised a perfectly manicured eyebrow. "A distraction that's wearing your ring, James. The board is concerned about your impulsive decision. Carter Enterprises deals in billions. We can't afford instability at the top." James watched as Olivia excused herself from the conversation, her emerald green dress, one he'd had his assistant pick out, making her look even more out of place among the designer gowns surrounding her. 2 years ago, when he'd met her at that small coffee shop in Brooklyn, her genuine warmth and beauty had sparked something in him. A moment of weakness, he now realized, that had led to a hasty marriage that threatened everything he'd built. "The situation will be handled," he said firmly, turning away from the window. "Now, shall we discuss the Singapore merger?" The evening progressed like a well-orchestrated symphony until a single discordant note shattered the harmony. James overheard snippets of conversation from a group near the bar, something about his wife's humble beginnings and lucky break. He watched as Olivia, trying to fit in, mentioned her previous job as a waitress, clearly missing the subtle sneers her confession provoked. The scotch in his system, combined with years of suppressed frustration, finally breached his carefully maintained facade. In 3 long strides, he reached Olivia's side, his fingers wrapping around her arm with quiet force. "A word," he said, his voice carrying just enough authority to silence the nearby conversations. He led her toward his private office, away from the curious eyes of their guests. Olivia's soft voice trembled slightly as the door closed behind them. "James, I was just what?" He cut her off, releasing her arm as though the touch burned him. "Or just reminding everyone that I married a waitress, that the CEO of Carter Enterprises found his wife serving coffee." "I was trying to be honest," she whispered, her hazel eyes filling with tears that she bravely held back. "I'm not ashamed of who I am." James laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Well, I am. This experiment is over, Olivia. You're an embarrassment to everything I've built. A mistake I should never have made." The words hung in the air between them like shattered glass. Olivia stood very still, her face draining of color. But something shifted in her eyes, a spark of dignity emerging from the ashes of his cruel words. "Pack your things tonight," he continued, straightening his tie. "I'll have my lawyers contact you tomorrow." Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked back to the party, leaving behind the woman who had once made him feel something real. As he rejoined his guests, accepting a fresh glass of scotch from a passing waiter, James Carter convinced himself that this was necessary, a simple business decision to protect his empire. He didn't see Olivia slip quietly from the building, her head held high despite the tears now falling freely. He didn't notice when she removed her wedding ring and placed it on his desk, alongside a handwritten note that read simply, "Thank you for showing me who you really are." By morning, she had vanished from his life like morning mist before the sun, leaving behind only the echo of what could have been and the first hairline crack in James Carter's perfect glass house. 6 months after leaving James Carter's penthouse, Olivia sat cross-legged on the floor of her small Brooklyn apartment, surrounded by fabric swatches and design sketches. The space was tiny compared to her former home, but the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the window made the worn hardwood floors glow with a warmth she'd never felt in that cold glass tower. Her fingers traced the edge of a piece of sustainable bamboo fabric, its subtle texture sparking an idea she quickly captured in her sketchbook. The apartment might be small, but it was alive with creativity, eco-friendly material samples pinned to corkboards, sketches of furniture, designs taped to walls, and a sewing machine humming quietly in the corner where she worked on prototypes. "Oh, you're sure about this?" Rachel Chen, her former college roommate and now closest confidant, asked from her perch on Olivia's second-hand couch. "Starting a business isn't easy, especially in sustainable design. The market's dominated by major players." Olivia looked up, a quiet determination in her eyes that hadn't been there during her marriage. "I'm sure. While I was with James, I lost myself trying to fit into his world. But this," she gestured to her designs. "This is who I've always been. Remember our dorm room, how we'd reimagine every piece of furniture to be both beautiful and environmentally conscious." Rachel smiled, remembering their late-night dreaming sessions. "And now you're actually doing it. Speaking of your ex," she hesitated, then held up her phone, displaying a business magazine's website. "Have you seen this?" Olivia's heart thumped painfully as she glimpsed James's face on the screen. The article headline read, "Carter Enterprises CEO announces engagement to Regina Walsh, board member and banking heiress." 3 months, Olivia whispered, then laughed softly, the sound carrying more relief than bitterness. "He waited 3 months after our divorce to replace me with someone from his world." Across town, in the uppermost office of Carter Enterprises, James stood at his familiar position by the windows, but the scotch in his hand had become a more frequent companion. Regina sat at his desk, reviewing acquisition documents with the precision of a surgeon. "The Walsh-Carter merger will be the talk of Wall Street," she said, not looking up. "Our combined resources will make us unstoppable in the market." James made a non-committal sound, his eyes fixed on the city below. The engagement ring on Regina's finger caught the light, its flawless diamond technically perfect, just like everything else in his life now. So why did it all feel so hollow? "James," Regina's voice carried a note of irritation. "Are you listening? The board needs your decision on the tech division layoffs. 200 families," he murmured. "What?" "Nothing." He turned, his face a mask of corporate efficiency. "Proceed with the cuts. It's just business." Later that night, unable to sleep in his king-sized bed with its imported sheets, James found himself scrolling through old photos on his phone. He'd meant to delete them months ago, snapshots of a life that felt like someone else's memory. Olivia laughing in Central Park, snow in her hair. Olivia asleep on their couch, a book about environmental design fallen open on her chest. Olivia trying to teach him to make pancakes, flour on her nose and joy in her eyes. He deleted them all with savage clicks, then poured another drink. Meanwhile, in her small apartment, Olivia was still working, fueled by passion and instant coffee. Her first collection was taking shape, furniture pieces that told stories of renewal and transformation. Each design incorporated reclaimed materials, giving discarded things new purpose and beauty. A knock at her door startled her from her work. She opened it to find her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, holding a steaming plate of homemade empanadas. "You work too hard, mijita," the older woman said, pressing the plate into her hands. But I see the light in your eyes now, much better than when you first came here, looking like a ghost." Olivia accepted the plate with genuine gratitude, remembering how Mrs. Rodriguez had welcomed her 6 months ago when she'd arrived with nothing but a suitcase and shattered dreams. "I'm not that person anymore," she said softly. "No, you're not," Mrs. Rodriguez agreed, patting her cheek. "But you're becoming who you were always meant to be." After her neighbor left, Olivia returned to her work, energized. On her desk lay a business plan for O&B Designs, Olivia and Bennett, a name that reclaimed her identity. Her laptop showed an email from a small but respected sustainable business incubator, expressing interest in her concept. She picked up a piece of reclaimed wood, smoothing her hand over its weathered surface. Like this wood, she thought, sometimes beautiful things had to be broken down and stripped bare before they could be transformed into something stronger, something true. In his penthouse, James closed another major deal, his phone buzzing with congratulatory messages he didn't bother to read. Regina had already sent out their engagement photos to all the right publications, their perfect smiles masking the emptiness beneath. Neither James nor Olivia knew it yet, but their paths were already bending back toward each other, like light refracting through a prism, splitting into separate spectrums before inevitable convergence. The world of sustainable design that Olivia was tentatively entering would soon collide with James's empire in ways neither could imagine, and the lessons they'd learned in their time apart would be tested in the crucible of second chances. 3 years had transformed Olivia's tiny Brooklyn apartment into the nerve center of a growing enterprise. The corkboards once covered in dreams now displayed press clippings, O&B Designs, the future of sustainable luxury, and rising star in eco-friendly furniture. Her dining table had become a conference space where she sat now, surrounded by her small but devoted team. She said the Chicago showroom exceeded projections by 30% this quarter, announced Diana Foster, her head of sales, a former corporate executive who'd left her prestigious position to join Olivia's vision. "And the waiting list for the Metamorphosis collection keeps growing." Olivia smiled, remembering the collection's inspiration. Furniture pieces that seemed to emerge from their raw materials like butterflies from cocoons. Each piece told a story of transformation, something her wealthy clients found irresistibly authentic in a world of mass production. "What about the London expansion?" she asked, turning to Xavier Woods, her operations director, who'd been with her since the incubator days. "The location's perfect," Xavier replied, pulling up photos on his tablet. "A restored Victorian warehouse in Shoreditch. The history of the building aligns perfectly with our brand values of preservation and renewal." Rachel, now her creative director, caught Olivia's eye across the table and winked. They both remembered late nights in this very apartment, dreaming up impossible futures while sharing takeout and determination. Across town, in the sterile boardroom of Carter Enterprises, James sat at the head of a very different meeting. Regina, now his wife of 2 years, was presenting quarterly projections with laser-focused precision. "Our traditional markets are showing signs of stagnation," she reported, her voice carrying the clipped tone of suppressed frustration. "The younger demographic, in particular, is shifting towards sustainable alternatives. We're hemorrhaging market share to smaller, more environmentally conscious competitors." James barely heard her. His attention had drifted to a familiar name in the competitor analysis report, O&B Designs. The company had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, capturing a growing segment of luxury consumers with their innovative, sustainable designs. Something about their philosophy nagged at his memory, but he couldn't place it. "James," Regina's sharp tone cut through his thoughts. "The board is waiting for your decision on the Indonesian timber project." He looked up at the faces around the table, hungry, expectant, all wearing masks as carefully constructed as his own. "Proceed with the acquisition," he said mechanically. But I want a complete analysis of these sustainable design companies on my desk by morning. Later that evening, Olivia walked through her newest showroom in Soho, running her fingers along a dining table crafted from reclaimed cypress wood. The piece had been salvaged from an old Louisiana dock, its water-worn surface telling stories of storms weathered and survived. Ms. Bennett, her assistant, Ryan, appeared with a tablet. The Environmental Business Awards Committee called, "You're being honored as Innovator of the Year." Olivia absorbed the news with quiet pride. "Schedule the whole team for the ceremony. This belongs to all of us." As she left the showroom, she passed a young couple admiring one of her signature pieces, a console table that incorporated broken mirror fragments in its design, each shard carefully placed to reflect light in unexpected ways. She overheard the woman say, "It's like it's been through something and come out more beautiful." Olivia smiled to herself, remembering the night she designed that piece, unable to sleep, haunted by memories of another life. She'd gathered broken mirrors from restoration projects, seeing in their fractured surfaces a reflection of her own journey. Meanwhile, James stood in his home office, Regina's voice carrying from downstairs as she coordinated their upcoming charity gala. Another perfect event for their perfect life. He loosened his tie, feeling the familiar constriction in his chest that no amount of success seemed to ease. His phone buzzed with a message from his assistant, research complete on O&B Designs, founded by Olivia Bennett. Former married name, Carter. The phone slipped from his fingers, clattering on his desk. The sound echoed in the empty room like a starting gun, signaling the beginning of a race neither of them knew they were about to run. In her loft apartment, bought with her company's first major success, Olivia reviewed designs for her next collection. Inspired by the concept of Phoenix Rising, each piece would incorporate elements of fire and rebirth. Her phone lit up with a message from Diana, Carter Enterprises requesting meeting to discuss potential collaboration. Olivia stared at the message, her heart performing a complex rhythm of anxiety and vindication. She'd known this day might come, had prepared for it, even. What she hadn't expected was the tremor in her hands as she typed her response, "Schedule it." As night fell over New York, two people in different parts of the city faced the same skyline with very different perspectives. James, in his glass tower, felt the walls of his perfect world beginning to crack. Olivia, surrounded by the fruits of her creativity and courage, stood ready to face whatever came next. Neither could have predicted how their carefully constructed new lives were about to collide, or how the seeds of change planted in pain would bloom in unexpected ways. The stage was set for a reunion that would force them both to confront not just each other, but the people they had become in the aftermath of their shared past. The O&B Designs headquarters in Brooklyn occupied a renovated textile mill, its brick walls and wooden beams restored to their original beauty. Olivia had deliberately chosen this location, away from the glass and steel canyons of Manhattan. It was here, in her territory, that she would face James Carter for the first time in 5 years. Diana watched her adjust the conference room's sustainable bamboo blinds for the third time. "We can cancel," she offered, concerned by the slight tremor in her boss's usually steady hands. "No," Olivia replied, smoothing her cream silk blouse. "Some meetings are meant to happen." She glanced around the room, drawing strength from the space she'd created. The walls displayed her journey, from initial sketches to magazine covers. A prototype from her newest collection dominated one corner. A conference table made from ancient redwood, salvaged from the ocean floor. Its surface told a story of submergence and resurrection. Xavier entered, his expression grave. "They're here." Carter brought Regina Walsh Carter and 2 executives. Olivia nodded, taking her place at the head of the table. "Let's show them what real value looks like." James Carter's first step into O&B Designs felt like crossing an invisible boundary. The space was nothing like the sterile corporate environments he inhabited. Light filtered through tall windows, casting warm patterns on reclaimed wood floors. The air carried a subtle scent of beeswax and possibility. How? Rustic, Regina commented, her Louboutins clicking against the floor. A young man in a well-tailored sustainable cotton suit approached. Welcome to O&B Designs. I'm Ryan, Ms. Bennett's assistant. Please follow me. James noted how every employee they passed moved with purpose and pride. This wasn't the chaos of a small business. It was the synchronized rhythm of a vision in motion. Then they entered the conference room, and time seemed to stutter. Olivia stood framed by sunlight, and for a moment, James forgot how to breathe. She'd always been beautiful, but now she radiated something more, an inner authority that made her presence fill the room. Her hair, once long and often hidden behind her ears, was now styled in a confident shoulder-length cut that framed her face. But it was her eyes that struck him most. Clear, direct, and utterly unafraid. "Welcome to O&B Designs," she said, her voice carrying none of the tremors she felt inside. "Please, have a seat." Regina's eyes darted between them, a calculating gleam in their depths. The other executives, Anderson from acquisitions and Wright from legal, took their seats with professional detachment, unaware of the currents running beneath the surface. "Impressive operation," James managed, his voice rougher than intended, though hardly what I expected when I heard about the rising star of sustainable design. Olivia's smile didn't waver. "Expectations can be limiting, Mr. Carter. We prefer to exceed them." She nodded to Diana, who began their presentation. The next hour was a masterclass in professional poise. Olivia and her team laid out their company's achievements, market position, and growth projections. James watched her handle complex questions with ease, demonstrating an expertise that both impressed and unsettled him. "Your profit margins are remarkable for the sustainable sector," Regina interjected, her tone suggesting this was somehow suspect. "Because we understand true value isn't just financial," Olivia responded. "Our clients pay for authenticity, craftsmanship, and environmental responsibility, something the market is increasingly demanding." "Which brings us to the purpose of this meeting," James said, leaning forward. "Carter Enterprises is interested in acquiring a controlling stake in O&B Designs." The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Olivia's team exchanged glances, but she remained perfectly still. "We're prepared to make a very generous offer," James continued, sliding a folder across the table. "Your company would benefit from our resources and distribution networks." Olivia didn't touch the folder. Instead, she stood and walked to the prototype table in the corner. "This redwood spent over a century underwater," she said, running her hand along its surface. "Most people would have written it off as worthless, but we saw its potential. Under our care, it became something extraordinary." She turned to face James directly. "Some things aren't for sale, Mr. Carter. Some things have to grow on their own terms." James felt the familiar anger rise, the frustration of being denied something he wanted, but mixed with it was something else, reluctant admiration. "You're making a mistake," Regina cut in. "The market is volatile. You need our protection." Olivia's laugh was genuine and surprised them all. Protection? From what? From building something real, from staying true to our values. She shook her head. "Oh, thank you for your interest, but O&B Designs is not for sale, not to Carter Enterprises, not to anyone." As they prepared to leave, James lingered behind. For a moment, they stood alone in the room that showcased everything she'd built without him. "You've done well," he said finally, the words feeling inadequate. "Yes," she agreed simply. "I have." He turned to go, then stopped. "That night, I was wrong." "You were," Olivia acknowledged. "But being wrong taught us both who we really are." She gathered her papers, her dismissal clear. "Good afternoon, James." Later, as his car wound through Brooklyn's streets, James stared at the folder containing acquisition documents that would never be signed. Regina was already on the phone, plotting alternative strategies, but he barely heard her. His mind was stuck on the look in Olivia's eyes, not of hatred or revenge, but of complete freedom from the power he'd once held over her. In her office, Olivia finally allowed her hands to shake as she poured herself a glass of water. Rachel appeared in her doorway, concern evident on her face. "Are you okay?" Olivia looked out at her busy workspace, at the empire she'd built from broken pieces and bold dreams. "You know what? I really am." The weeks following the failed acquisition attempt brought autumn to New York, painting Central Park in shades of amber and gold. James found himself walking there during lunch breaks, something he hadn't done since those early days with Olivia. The quarterly reports on his desk showed troubling trends. Carter Enterprises' traditional markets were continuing to erode, with sustainable competitors claiming larger shares each month. "The board is getting nervous," Regina announced, entering his office without knocking. She placed a stack of newspapers on his desk, each highlighting O&B Design's latest triumph, a major contract to furnish a chain of luxury eco-hotels. "Your little wife has become quite the thorn in our side." "Ex-wife," James corrected automatically, his eyes drawn to Olivia's photo in the Wall Street Journal. She was speaking at a sustainability conference, her passion evident even in newsprint, and she earned her success. Regina's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "Earned it. Please, she got lucky with this green trend. But trends change, James. We need to act decisively. What are you suggesting?" Anderson found some irregularities in O&B's supply chain. Nothing major, but enough to raise questions. One well-placed whisper about sustainability certification issues. James felt something cold settle in his stomach. "No," he said firmly. "No." Regina's voice took on a dangerous edge. "Since when do you care about playing fair? The James Carter I married would do whatever it takes to win. The James Carter you married is wondering if winning at any cost is worth the price," he replied, surprising himself with the admission. Across town, Olivia sat in her favorite coffee shop, the same one where she'd first met James years ago. The irony wasn't lost on her as she reviewed the latest offers from investors. Word of Carter Enterprises' failed acquisition had sparked intense interest in O&B Designs. "Your 3 o'clock is here," Ryan texted. "To William Nash from Sterling Ventures." Olivia gathered her papers, leaving a generous tip for the barista who still remembered her order from her waitressing days. The memory of James's face when he'd first walked into her headquarters lingered, stirring emotions she thought she'd long buried. Back at O&B, William Nash proved to be everything James wasn't: warm, genuinely interested in sustainable practices, and respectful of her vision. His investment offer was more than fair, with no strings attached. "We believe in what you're building here," Nash said, his silver hair and kind eyes reminding her of her father. "We want to help you grow, not change you." After he left, Rachel found Olivia in the design studio, sketching absently. "That good, huh?" "The offer's perfect," Olivia admitted. "So why do I feel so unsettled?" Rachel studied her friend's face. Because success means something different now. It's not just about proving him wrong anymore." That evening, James sat alone in his penthouse office, Regina's words echoing in his mind. The man he'd been 5 years ago wouldn't have hesitated to destroy a competitor, but seeing Olivia again, witnessing what she'd built from the ashes of their marriage, had awakened something he'd long suppressed. Conscience, perhaps, or regret. His phone buzzed with a text from Regina. "Board meeting tomorrow. Needs strategy for O&B situation." Instead of responding, he found himself scrolling through business news archives, tracking Olivia's journey. Each article revealed another layer: her commitment to working with small, sustainable suppliers, her program helping former convicts learn furniture crafting, her mentorship of young female entrepreneurs. "Sir," his security desk called up, "there's a delivery for you." Minutes later, James opened a large flat package. Inside was O&B's latest catalogue, addressed simply to Carter Enterprises. He opened it, and a small note fell out. "Thought you might want to see what real growth looks like." Oh, the catalogue was beautiful, featuring not just furniture, but the stories behind each piece. The artisans, the reclaimed materials, the environmental impact saved. In the center was their flagship piece, a massive boardroom table made from a fallen sequoia, its rings marking centuries of history. James traced the wood grain in the photo, remembering Olivia's words. Some things have to grow on their own terms. His phone buzzed again. "Regina, don't forget dinner with the Andersons tonight. Wear the blue tie." He texted back, "Not feeling well. Go without me." For the first time in years, James ordered takeout from a small Chinese restaurant, the kind of place Regina would never set foot in. He ate at his desk, studying O&B's catalogue like a man searching for answers in ancient texts. Meanwhile, Olivia sat in her new apartment's window seat, Sterling Ventures, offer unopened beside her. The city lights twinkled below, and somewhere out there, she knew James was probably plotting his next move. But for the first time since their reunion, she realized his moves no longer defined her path. She picked up her phone and dialed, "Mr. Nash, about your offer. I have some conditions I'd like to discuss." The night settled over New York, and in different parts of the city, two people faced turning points they hadn't seen coming. James Carter, surrounded by the trappings of power, began to question everything he'd built his life upon. And Olivia Bennett, finally ready to expand her vision beyond the boundaries of their shared past, prepared to take her biggest risk yet, not to prove something to her ex-husband, but to prove something to herself. Neither knew that their paths were about to cross again, in a way that would test not just their business acumen, but the very foundations of who they'd become. The first signs of trouble appeared like distant storm clouds on Wall Street's horizon. James stood in his office, watching financial headlines scroll across multiple screens. Global supply chain crisis looms, raw material prices soar, market volatility reaches 5-year high. "It's worse than we thought," Regina said, striding into his office with Anderson and Wright in tow. "Our suppliers in Southeast Asia are facing severe disruptions. The sustainable materials market is in chaos." James's mind immediately went to O&B Designs. If his company was struggling with supply chains, smaller companies must be drowning. He pushed away the unwelcome concern. "What are our options?" "We've secured exclusive contracts with remaining stable suppliers," Anderson reported, looking pleased with himself. "It's costly, but it gives us a strategic advantage. Smaller competitors won't be able to match these prices." Regina's smile was razor-sharp. Sometimes the market corrects itself naturally. Survival of the fittest. At O&B Designs, Olivia faced her own war room scenario. Xavier's usually calm demeanor was strained as he delivered the news. "3 of our major suppliers have cancelled contracts. They're saying they can't meet our price points anymore." Diana pulled up their projections. "If we can't secure new suppliers within 2 weeks, we'll have to halt production on the hotel chain contract. We'd be in breach. What about our smaller artisan partners?" Olivia asked, thinking of the local craftspeople who depended on them. "They're getting squeezed out," Rachel reported softly. "The big corporations are buying up everything at prices they can't match." Olivia walked to her window, watching Brooklyn's streets below. The community she'd built wasn't just a business. It was an ecosystem of artists, craftspeople, and dreamers who believed in something bigger than profit margins. Her phone buzzed with a message from William Nash. "Sterling Ventures still ready to help. Say the word." But something about the timing felt wrong. She'd learned to trust her instincts. "Get me everything you can find about recent market acquisitions," she told Ryan, "and especially anything involving Carter Enterprises." That evening, James broke his own rules. He drove to Brooklyn, parking outside O&B Designs headquarters. Light still burned in the upper windows, and he could see figures moving around, presumably working late to address the crisis. His phone rang. Regina again. He ignored it, remembering the board meeting earlier that day. They'd discussed market consolidation opportunities with the kind of bloodthirsty enthusiasm that used to energize him. Now it just left him feeling hollow. Upstairs, Olivia pored over market reports until her eyes burned. A pattern was emerging, one that made her blood run cold. "Ryan," she called out to her assistant, who was still faithfully at his desk. "Get me the timeline of supplier contract cancellations again." She laid out the data points, like pieces of a puzzle. Major corporations securing exclusive contracts just days before prices skyrocketed. Smaller companies suddenly finding themselves locked out of their usual supply chains. And strategic acquisitions happening too perfectly to be coincidence. "They're manufacturing the crisis," she whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. A knock at her office door made her jump. Diana entered, looking grave. "Sterling Ventures called again. They've raised their offer by 30%. Olivia's laugh held no humor. "Of course they have. They know exactly what's coming." She stood, decision crystallizing. "Call everyone back. Emergency meeting in 20 minutes. Down in his car, James watched as lights began coming back on throughout the building, people returning at this late hour. His phone buzzed with a text from Anderson. Walsh-Carter strategy proceeding as planned. Target companies beginning to fold. He closed his eyes, remembering Olivia's words about true value. Opening them again, he saw her in her office, commanding attention as she addressed her team. Even from this distance, he could see the fierce determination in her stance. Making a decision that would change everything, he pulled out his phone and began typing an email. Subject line: Evidence of market manipulation, Carter Enterprises internal documents. He attached files he'd been gathering since his suspicions first arose. Emails, meeting minutes, strategy documents. His finger hovered over the send button as he entered Olivia's email address. Inside, Olivia was rallying her team. "They think we'll crumble, that we'll sell out to save ourselves. But they've forgotten something crucial." She touched the reclaimed wood of her desk. "Everything beautiful we've created came from what others thought was worthless. We know how to weather storms." Rachel stepped forward. "What's the plan?" "We go local, reach out to every small supplier, every artisan within 500 miles. We adapt our designs to use what's available. We tell our clients the truth, that we're fighting to keep sustainable design truly sustainable." "The hotel chain contract," Diana began. "I'll handle it." "Sometimes standing your ground costs something." Olivia's voice carried absolute conviction. "But compromising your values costs more." As her team dispersed to begin implementing their survival strategy, Olivia's computer chimed with a new email. The sender made her pause. James Carter. Outside, James sat in his car, the weight of what he'd just done settling over him. He'd spent decades building his empire on the principle that business was just business, nothing personal. But watching the lights in Olivia's office, seeing the loyalty she inspired, he realized she'd built something he never had, a company with a soul. His phone rang again. "Regina." This time he answered. "We need to talk," he said before she could speak. "Things are about to change." The night deepened over New York, and two very different kinds of courage took shape in the darkness. In her office, Olivia opened James's email, her sharp intake of breath the only sound in the quiet room. And in his car, James Carter finally drove away from the company he'd once dismissed, knowing that by morning nothing would be the same for either of them. Dawn broke over New York with the fury of a media firestorm. James stood in his home office, watching financial news networks explode with headlines. Carter Enterprises scandal. CEO exposes market manipulation. Regina Walsh-Carter named in federal investigation. Wall Street giants face scrutiny over supply chain crisis. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since the story broke. Regina's name appeared again on the screen, but this time there was nothing left to say. Her last message said everything. "You betrayed us for her. I'll destroy you both." The sound of breaking glass downstairs jolted him from his thoughts. He found Regina in their living room, a shattered crystal vase at her feet, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. 5 years, she seethed, her voice trembling. 5 years I spent making you into the king of Wall Street, and you throw it all away for what? To protect her. James looked at his wife, really looked at her, and saw for the first time how empty their perfect life had become. "No," he said quietly, "to become someone I can live with." At O&B Designs, Olivia had called an all-hands meeting in their main showroom. Her entire team gathered among their creations, anxiety visible on every face. The evidence James had provided was projected on a screen behind her: emails, contracts, board meeting minutes, all revealing the orchestrated attempt to crush sustainable design companies. "First," she began, her voice steady, "we're no longer in immediate danger. The federal investigation has already frozen the manipulated supply contracts." She paused, allowing that to sink in. "But more importantly, we have a choice to make." Diana raised her hand. "The media's outside. They want your statement about James Carter's involvement." The room fell silent. Everyone knew the history, knew what James had once done to their founder. Olivia touched the smooth surface of the redwood conference table beside her, drawing strength from its weathered beauty. "James Carter just sacrificed everything to expose this conspiracy," she said carefully. "Not just his company, but his reputation, his marriage, his entire world. The question is, what do we do with that information?" "We could destroy him," Xavier suggested, his loyalty to Olivia evident. "One interview about your history together, and the media would tear him apart." Rachel watched her friend closely. "But that's not what you're thinking, is it?" Meanwhile, James faced his own moment of reckoning in the Carter Enterprises boardroom. The board of directors had convened an emergency session, their faces ranging from shocked to furious. "You realize this is corporate suicide," Anderson spat. "The lawsuits alone will take years." "Then they'll take years," James replied, standing at the window where he'd spent so many hours viewing the world from above. "But we'll face them honestly. Regina was right about you." Wright sneered. "You've gone soft. And for what? Some tree-hugging furniture maker?" James turned to face them, feeling strangely peaceful. "No, for the chance to build something real." Back at O&B, Olivia sat alone in her office, reading James's email for the 100th time. Between the lines of corporate evidence, she saw something she'd never expected: growth. The man who had once cast her aside for threatening his image had just destroyed that image to do what was right. Her phone buzzed with a text from William Nash: "Sterling Ventures, withdrawing all offers, can't be associated with the scandal." "Sorry." Olivia smiled, remembering how close she'd come to accepting their help. Sometimes the worst things that could happen turned out to be blessings in disguise. She'd learned that lesson well. Ryan appeared at her door. "Miss Bennett, Mr. Carter is here." The office fell silent as James walked through, his presence both familiar and utterly changed. Gone was the armor of corporate invincibility. He looked tired, human, real. Olivia met him in her office, closing the door on the curious eyes of her team. For a moment, neither spoke. "The board's calling for my resignation," he finally said, his voice rough. "Regina's lawyers have already contacted mine." "I know," Olivia replied. "It's all over the news." "I don't regret it," he said, meeting her eyes directly. "For the first time in my life, I don't regret doing the right thing." Olivia moved to her window, looking out at the Brooklyn streets below. "You know what I've learned about breaking points, James. They're really breaking free points. Sometimes you have to lose everything to become who you're meant to be." She turned back to him. "Decision made. Which is why I'm calling a press conference. O&B Designs will publicly support your whistleblowing actions. We'll verify the evidence and testify if needed." James stared at her, stunned. "Why would you help me? After everything?" "Because 5 years ago you showed me who you were, and I built something beautiful from that pain. Today you showed everyone who you've become. Maybe it's time to build something new from that truth." As if on cue, Rachel knocked and entered with a tablet. "Sorry to interrupt, but you both need to see this. The sustainable design community is rallying. Small companies across the country are coming forward with similar evidence. They're calling it the Green Revolution in corporate ethics." Olivia and James exchanged a look that held years of history and hints of possibility. Outside her office window, a crowd of reporters had gathered, all wanting to know the story behind the biggest corporate scandal of the year. But the real story wasn't in the headlines or the evidence or even the market manipulation. The real story was in that office, where two people who had once broken each other were discovering that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is help someone else rise from their own ashes. "So," Olivia said, straightening her shoulders, "ready to face them?" James nodded, understanding that she meant more than just the media. "Together." "Together," she agreed, opening her office door to the future that awaited them both. The media dubbed it the Brooklyn Summit, the day O&B Designs opened its doors to sustainable design companies from across the country. Olivia stood at the entrance of their main workshop, now transformed into a conference space, watching representatives from over 30 small businesses file in. Each carried stories of survival against corporate giants, of fighting to maintain their environmental principles in a hostile market. James arrived last, looking both out of place and somehow right at home among the exposed brick walls and reclaimed wood furnishings. The whispers that followed him weren't entirely friendly, but they weren't entirely hostile either. His whistle-blowing had earned him a complex sort of respect. "Quite a turnout," he said, joining Olivia at the front of the room. The casual observer might have missed the slight tremor in his usually steady hands. "People tend to show up when you give them hope," she replied, then turned to address the crowd. "Welcome to O&B Designs. We're here because each of us believes that business can be both profitable and principled. Today, we're going to prove it." Over the next several hours, they mapped out a new kind of business alliance. James, stripped of his corporate armor, but not his strategic mind, helped identify legal ways to share resources and maintain stable supply chains. Olivia's vision of sustainable cooperation began to take concrete shape. "If we pool our shipping resources," a furniture maker from Oregon suggested, "we could reduce both costs and carbon footprint. My company has excess sustainable bamboo supply," offered another from California. "We could share with East Coast manufacturers." Rachel watched from the corner as Olivia and James worked in unexpected synchronization. "It's like watching a complicated dance," she murmured to Diana. "They're not even aware they're doing it." The dance hit a sudden stumble when Regina's name appeared on Olivia's phone. She stepped out to take the call, James's eyes following her with concern. "Your little alliance is touching," Regina's voice dripped sarcasm. "But did you really think I wouldn't have a backup plan? Check your email, dear. You have 1 hour to announce you're selling O&B Designs to Sterling Ventures, or every major publication gets proof that you knew about the market manipulation weeks ago and profited from it." Olivia's hand tightened on her phone. "That's a lie. Truth is whatever the media decides it is. Ask your ex-husband. He's learning that lesson right now." Back in the workshop, James was helping a group map out shared warehouse locations when he noticed Olivia hadn't returned. He found her in her office, staring at her computer screen. "Regina?" he asked, closing the door. Olivia nodded, turning the screen to show him the fabricated evidence. "She's thorough. I'll give her that." "I'm so sorry," he began, but Olivia cut him off. "Don't. This isn't your fault. Regina made her own choices." She stood, pacing her office. "But she's right about one thing. The media would run with this. It would destroy everything we're building here today." James studied her face, remembering another moment when she'd faced destruction of her dreams. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about patterns," she said, stopping at her design wall. "Look at this." She pointed to a series of sketches showing the evolution of her Phoenix collection. Every piece tells a story of transformation. But the transformation isn't just about the materials, it's about the process. Understanding dawned in James's eyes. "You want to get ahead of the story. More than that, I want to change it." She turned to him, eyes bright with purpose. "Regina thinks she can use our past to destroy our future, but what if we use it to build something instead? Within minutes, they'd gathered the core team. Xavier, Diana, and Rachel listened as Olivia outlined her plan. James added strategic insights, his corporate experience now serving a different purpose. "It's risky," Diana warned, "going public with your full history. The truth is going to come out anyway," Olivia said, "but this way, it becomes part of a bigger story, about change, about redemption, about building something better from the ashes of what was broken." Rachel smiled. "Like every piece of furniture we make." They worked through the night, the workshop still humming with activity as their allies contributed ideas and support. By morning, they had more than a defense. They had a manifesto for a new way of doing business. Olivia found James asleep at her conference table, his laptop still open to draft press releases and legal documents. She placed a cup of coffee beside him, the aroma bringing him slowly awake. "Remember when you used to bring me coffee?" she asked softly. "Back at the shop where we met?" He sat up, rubbing his eyes. "I remember thinking you were the most genuine person I'd ever met. I was right about that, at least." "You know this plan might not work," she said, sitting across from him. "Regina's powerful, and she's got nothing left to lose." "Neither do I," he replied, then corrected himself. "Actually, that's not true. For the first time in my life, I have something real to lose, the chance to make things right." Olivia studied him over her coffee cup. "When did you change so much?" "When I saw what you built from the ruins I left behind." He met her gaze steadily. "You showed me what real strength looks like." The morning sun began to paint Brooklyn's skyline in shades of possibility. In Olivia's workshop, their allies were already returning, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Regina's 1-hour deadline had come and gone, but they weren't running anymore. "Ready?" Olivia asked, standing. James nodded, and together they walked back into the workshop where a new kind of future was taking shape. Neither of them had noticed that somewhere during the night they'd stopped walking on eggshells around each other. The past was still there, but like the reclaimed wood surrounding them, it was becoming part of something new, something stronger for having been broken. The interview room at the New York Times felt smaller than Olivia had imagined. She sat beside James, both of them facing not just the journalist, but a future they'd chosen to shape on their own terms. The reporter, Catherine Lynn, known for her uncompromising coverage of corporate corruption, studied them with keen interest. "So, you're telling me that before O&B Designs became a leader in sustainable furniture, its founder was married to the CEO of Carter Enterprises?" Catherine's recorder blinked steadily between them. "So now you're working together to expose corporate manipulation of the sustainable materials market." "The truth is more complicated than that," Olivia began, her voice steady. "It's a story about transformation, both personal and professional." James watched her as she spoke, seeing not the young woman he'd once dismissed, but a leader who had built something remarkable from the wreckage he'd left behind. When it was his turn to speak, the words came with unexpected ease. "I was the villain in this story," he said simply. "I had everything society told me was valuable, but I'd lost sight of true worth. It took losing everything, and watching what Olivia built from nothing to understand that." Back at O&B headquarters, Rachel and Diana coordinated with their alliance partners, preparing for Regina's inevitable response. The workshop buzzed with activity as sustainable design companies from across the country implemented their shared resource strategy. Reuters picked up the story, Xavier reported, rushing in with his tablet. "Regina Walsh Carter's legal team is already issuing denials, but the evidence is overwhelming." Rachel's phone chimed with a message from Olivia. "First phase complete. Prepare for counterstrike." They didn't have to wait long. Within hours, Sterling Ventures announced a hostile takeover attempt of several smaller sustainable design companies. The stock market churned with speculation. "She's trying to divide us," Diana observed, watching the market ticker. "She doesn't understand what we've built here," Rachel replied, touching the smooth surface of a recently completed conference table, a piece that had required materials and craftsmanship from 5 different alliance members. At the Times, the interview had shifted from past to present. Catherine Lynn leaned forward, her interest piqued. "Mr. Carter, you're facing criminal investigations, divorce proceedings, and the likely loss of your company. Do you regret your decision to expose the manipulation?" James felt Olivia's presence beside him, steady and sure. "The only regret I have is not seeing the truth sooner. Success built on destroying others isn't success at all." "And you, Ms. Bennett, working with the man who once publicly humiliated you, how does that serve O&B Design's interests?" Olivia smiled, the expression reaching her eyes. O&B Designs was built on the principle that broken things can become something beautiful. That applies to business practices, materials, and people. After the interview, they walked through Central Park, needing a moment before facing the next phase of their plan. The autumn air carried the scent of change. "Regina's next move will be personal," James warned, watching leaves scatter across their path. "She'll try to make this about us, twist the narrative." "Let her try," Olivia replied. "Some stories are stronger than scandal." His phone buzzed. Anderson, his former board member, trying to arrange a deal. Delete. Then Regina, "Last chance, darling. Remember what happened to the last person who crossed me?" James showed Olivia the message. She read it, then did something that surprised them both. She laughed. "She still thinks this is about power plays and revenge. She doesn't understand that we're playing a different game entirely." They reached the small coffee shop where they'd first met years ago. Through the window, they could see new baristas serving new customers, life moving forward as it always did. "I used to come here sometimes," James admitted quietly. After that night, I'd order coffee and try to understand where I'd gone wrong." Olivia touched his arm gently, their first real contact since beginning this alliance. "We all lose our way sometimes. The question is, what we build once we find it again." Her phone lit up with urgent messages. Regina's team had leaked photos of them walking in the park, suggesting a scandalous reunion. Social media was already buzzing with speculation. "Right on schedule," Olivia noted, pulling up their pre-prepared statement. With a few quick taps, Rachel would release it to all major news outlets, a comprehensive timeline of their history, their current professional collaboration, and most importantly, their vision for transforming corporate culture. James watched her work, seeing the strength that had always been there, the strength he'd once foolishly mistaken for weakness. "I never deserved your forgiveness," he said softly. "This isn't about forgiveness," she replied, looking up from her phone. "It's about choosing to build something meaningful instead of clinging to the past." "Ready for phase 3, he nodded, and together they headed back to Brooklyn, where their alliance partners were gathering for the announcement that would change everything. The media circus was in full swing outside O&B headquarters, but this time they weren't running from the spotlight. As they approached the building, James noticed something new in the entrance. A small plaque beside the door, inscribed with words that made his heart catch. "Every broken piece has a story. Every story has a future." Olivia saw him reading it and smiled. "I had it installed this morning." Seemed fitting. They entered together, ready to face whatever came next, neither of them quite acknowledging how natural it felt to be walking side by side again. The past hadn't changed, but something new was taking shape, something as unexpected and beautiful as the reclaimed masterpieces that filled O&B's workshop. Above them, the Brooklyn sky turned golden with evening light, painting their world in shades of possibility. The next few hours would determine everything, but for the first time in years, both of them were exactly where they needed to be. The day of the Sustainable Business Alliance launch dawned stormy, dark clouds gathering over Manhattan like an omen. Inside O&B's Brooklyn headquarters, now serving as the Alliance's command center, Olivia watched real-time market data scroll across multiple screens. Stock prices fluctuated wildly as Regina's coordinated attack began. Sterling Ventures just announced simultaneous hostile takeover bids for 12 alliance members, Diana reported, her voice tense. They're leveraging the market instability to force quick sales. Right on schedule, Olivia nodded, catching James's eye across the room. He'd spent the night helping alliance members prepare their defenses, his intimate knowledge of corporate raiders proving invaluable. The sight of him in casual clothes, sleeves rolled up and tie long discarded, still struck her as surreal. "Miss Bennet!" Ryan burst in, tablet in hand. "Regina Walsh-Carter is downstairs. She's demanding to see you both." James straightened, his expression hardening. "She's not supposed to be here. The restraining order." "Let her up," Olivia interrupted, earning surprised looks from her team. "And sometimes you have to face the storm to get through it." Minutes later, Regina strode into the office like she owned it, impeccable in Chanel and radiating cold fury. "How cozy," she sneered, taking in the sight of James and Olivia working side by side. The disgraced CEO and his former charity case playing at saving the world. "That's enough, Regina," James started, but Olivia touched his arm lightly. "What do you want?" she asked simply. Regina's laugh was brittle. "Want? I want what's mine. The empire I spent years building while you were playing with recycled furniture. Did you think I'd let you destroy it?" She pulled out her phone, displaying a series of emails. "Proof that O&B Designs engaged in price-fixing with alliance members. Once this hits the media, your little sustainable dream dies. Unless we dissolve the alliance," James finished, his voice tired. "And I sign over my Carter Enterprises shares to you." "Tick-tock," Regina smiled, the expression never reaching her eyes. The morning shows would love this story. Olivia moved to her window, looking out at the gathering storm. The selective silence that had once been her shield of survival now became her sword. She let Regina's words hang in the air, watching their reflection in the glass. "You know what I've learned about storms, Regina?" she finally said, turning back. "They reveal what's built to last and what's just for show." She walked to her design wall, touching a sketch of her latest piece, a massive installation commissioned for the Alliance headquarters. "Every piece we create here tells a story of transformation." "What's yours?" Regina's composure flickered. "Spare me your philosophical furniture nonsense. 5 years ago, you watched James throw me away because I threatened his image," Olivia continued calmly. "You thought that made him strong. But here's what you never understood. Real strength isn't about destroying things. It's about building them." She nodded to Diana, who pulled up a different set of documents on the main screen. James stepped forward, his voice steady. "We've been expecting you, Regina. Those emails you're holding, we can prove they're fabricated. In fact, we already have." Regina's phone buzzed insistently. Her lawyer, no doubt, warning her about the SEC investigation that had just been opened into Sterling Ventures' market manipulation. "You really think you've won?" Regina's voice shook slightly. "I still own enough shares to—" "No, you don't," James interrupted. "You did check your trading accounts." Regina's face went pale as she pulled up her stock portfolio. While she'd been focused on destroying their alliance, she'd missed the real play, a carefully orchestrated series of trades that had quietly transferred controlling interest to a consortium of sustainable investment funds. "How?" she whispered. "I learned from the best," James said quietly. "You taught me every corporate raid tactic in the book. The difference is, this time they're being used to protect something worth saving." Outside, thunder cracked as the storm broke over Brooklyn. Regina's phone erupted with messages, her lawyers, her board, the media. The empire she'd thought was unshakable was crumbling in real time. "This isn't over," she hissed, but her threats sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Actually, it is," Olivia said firmly. "Security will show you out. And Regina, the next time you want to destroy something, remember, some things grow stronger for having been broken." After she was gone, the office erupted in contained celebration. Alliance members across the country were reporting success in fending off the hostile takeover attempts. The sustainable investment funds were already implementing their promised support structure. James found Olivia in her workshop, running her hands over the rough surface of a newly reclaimed beam. "You knew she'd come," he said. "It wasn't a question. People like Regina can't help themselves," she replied. "They have to try to break what they don't understand." "I was like that once," he admitted. Olivia looked at him, really looked at him, seeing both the man who had shattered her world and the one who had helped her rebuild it. "No," she said softly. "You were lost. There's a difference." The storm raged outside, but within O&B's walls, something weathered and beautiful was taking shape. Their alliance had survived its first major test, proving that sustainable business could stand against corporate raiders. But more than that, two people who had once broken each other were learning that some things had to fall apart before they could be rebuilt into something stronger. "And the press conference starts in an hour," Ryan reminded them, poking his head in. James and Olivia shared a look that held volumes of unspoken understanding. They had won this battle, but the war for corporate reform was just beginning. The real work of building something new, of proving that business could be both profitable and principled, lay ahead. But for the first time, they were facing it together, their shared past becoming the foundation for a future neither of them had imagined possible. 2 weeks after Regina's downfall, autumn painted Brooklyn in rich ambers and golds. The O&B workshop hummed with activity as artisans crafted pieces for their most ambitious project yet, the complete renovation of Carter Enterprises' headquarters. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, least of all James, who stood watching a craftsman restore an antique conference table. "Thinking deep thoughts?" Olivia asked, joining him. She'd just returned from a series of meetings with Alliance members, her presence carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had weathered a storm and emerged stronger. "Remembering the first time I sat at this table," he replied, touching its scarred surface. 20 years ago, when I thought power meant destroying competition instead of creating collaboration. The table had been salvaged from Carter Enterprises' original offices, a piece Regina had ordered destroyed during one of her modernization initiatives. Instead, it had found its way to O&B's warehouse, waiting for the right moment to tell its story. "We're keeping the scars," Olivia explained, running her fingers along a deep groove in the wood. "But we're filling them with river gold lacquer. The Japanese call it kintsugi, the art of making broken things beautiful." James looked at her, seeing the metaphor for what it was. The past weeks had transformed them both in unexpected ways. His divorce from Regina was proceeding amidst a flurry of legal battles, while the corporate world watched Carter Enterprises' unprecedented shift towards sustainable practices with mixed skepticism and curiosity. "The board meeting's in an hour," he reminded her. "Are you ready?" Today marked a crucial moment, the official merger of Carter Enterprises, resources with the Sustainable Business Alliance's vision. It wasn't an acquisition or a takeover, but something entirely new, a partnership that would redefine corporate responsibility. "Almost," she replied. "There's something I need to show you first." She led him to her private design studio, a space he'd never entered before. Sketches and material samples covered the walls, but his attention was drawn to a covered piece in the center of the room. "I've been working on this for the past month," she said, removing the cover to reveal a desk unlike anything he'd seen before. The base was crafted from reclaimed steel and glass from Carter Enterprises' original building, twisted and transformed into an organic form that seemed to grow from the floor. The top was a masterwork of inlaid wood, each piece telling part of a story, their story. "It's meant for the new CEO's office," she explained, touching a section where dark wood met light in a perfect seam. A reminder that endings can become beginnings. James stood speechless, recognizing pieces of his past transformed into something new and beautiful. "Olivia, A knock interrupted them. Rachel entered, her expression a mix of excitement and concern. You both need to see this." They followed her to the main office, where the morning news played on multiple screens. The headline made them both stop. "Regina Walsh Carter announces new sustainable investment firm." "Is this a threat?" Diana asked, joining them. Olivia studied the footage of Regina announcing her new venture, noting the subtle changes in her former rival. The cold perfection had cracked, revealing something almost human underneath. "No," Olivia said finally. "I think it's adaptation. Sometimes people surprise you." James watched her, marveling at her capacity for grace. "You're really not afraid she'll try to compete with us?" "Competition isn't what it used to be," she reminded him. "We're building something different now." The morning light streamed through O&B's windows, catching the dust motes from the workshop below. The sound of crafting, of creation and transformation rose up like music. "Miss Bennett." Ryan appeared with a stack of papers. "The final contracts for the merger are ready. And there's something else." He handed her an envelope bearing the Environmental Business Awards logo. Olivia opened it, her eyes widening slightly. "They want us to give the keynote speech, both of us." "Together?" James asked, the word carrying weight beyond its simple meaning. "Together," she confirmed, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. They had an hour before the board meeting that would change everything. An hour before, they would stand before the corporate world and prove that sustainable business wasn't just about materials or profits, but about transforming the very nature of success. "Come on," Olivia said, gathering her presentation materials. "Let's go rewrite some rules." As they walked through the workshop, employees and artisans nodded in greeting. Here, in this space where broken things became beautiful, two people who had once shattered each other were building something unprecedented. The air thrummed with possibility. James caught himself watching Olivia as she stopped to discuss a design detail with a craftsman. She moved with the assurance of someone who knew exactly who she was and what she was creating. It was the same quality that had first drawn him to her years ago, before ambition and fear had blinded him to what really mattered. "Ready?" she asked, rejoining him. He looked around at the empire she had built, at the future they were crafting together, and felt something settle in his soul. "Ready?" Outside, Brooklyn hummed with life and potential. Inside O&B Designs, the workshop echoed with the sounds of creation, hammers and saws, voices and laughter, the music of transformation in progress. And in the space between what was and what could be, two people prepared to tell a story about breaking, rebuilding, and the endless possibility of change. 1 year later, the small coffee shop in Brooklyn where everything had begun was transformed for a private event. Olivia stood by the window where she'd once served coffee, now dressed in a simple but elegant blue dress, watching guests arrive for the Sustainable Business Alliance's first anniversary celebration. The shop had been her first major purchase after the merger, not for business, but for preservation. She'd kept the original staff, upgraded their benefits, and added a small design studio in the back where young artisans could learn sustainable crafting. It was her way of remembering where she came from, even as she helped shape where business was going. "Nervous about the speech?" Rachel asked, joining her at the window. "Not nervous," Olivia replied, touching the smooth wooden pendant at her neck, carved from the same reclaimed wood as James's new desk. "Just reflecting." The past year had been transformative for both O&B Designs and Carter Enterprises. Their merged venture, now called Legacy Sustainable Partners, had revolutionized corporate practices across industries. But more than that, it had proved that success could be measured in more than profit margins. James arrived as the evening light began to fade, looking relaxed in a way that still surprised those who had known him in his former life. His divorce from Regina had finalized 6 months ago. Around the same time, she had launched her own sustainable investment firm. In an unexpected turn, she had become one of their more thoughtful competitors, her drive for perfection channeled into actually improving industries rather than destroying competition. "The journalist from Forbes is here," he said, approaching Olivia. "I'm ready to tell our story one more time." she smiled, remembering all the versions of their story that had been told over the past year. The business press loved the corporate transformation angle. Social media celebrated the environmental impact, but few knew the whole truth, how two people had learned to build something beautiful from broken pieces. The coffee shop, filled with alliance members, employees, artisans, and even some former skeptics who had become believers. Mrs. Rodriguez, Olivia's former neighbor, sat in a place of honor, beaming with pride. Xavier and Diana managed the event logistics with their usual efficiency, while Ryan coordinated with the press. As the time for speeches approached, James found Olivia in the back room, looking at a new piece they'd created together, their first true collaboration. It was a small table, crafted from materials salvaged from both their past lives, wood from her first workshop floor, metal from his old office fixtures, and glass from the windows of his penthouse. Every element told part of their story. "It's strange," he said softly. "Standing here where we first met, I was so arrogant, so sure I knew what mattered." "We both learned," she replied. "Don, maybe that's what the journey was for." Their relationship over the past year had evolved with the same careful intention they brought to their designs. They had rebuilt trust slowly, learning to work together first as allies, then as friends, and gradually as something more, something neither of them rushed to define. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rachel's voice called from the main room, "but please welcome our founders." They walked out together, facing their gathered community. The room had been decorated with pieces that told the Alliance's story, furniture that represented transformation, sustainability, and hope. James spoke first, his voice carrying none of its old corporate coldness. "A year ago, we set out to prove that business could be different. That success could mean more than winning at someone else's expense. We believed that broken things could become beautiful," Olivia continued, "that endings could become beginnings, that people, like materials, could be transformed without losing their essential truth." As they shared their vision for the future, expansion of their artisan training programs, new sustainable technology investments, community development initiatives, Olivia felt the rightness of the moment. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about legacy, about creating something that would outlast them. After the speeches, as their guests mingled and celebrated, James and Olivia found themselves back by the window where they'd first met. The city lights twinkled outside, while inside, the warm glow of community and purpose filled the space. "Do you ever wonder," James asked quietly, "what would have happened if I hadn't been so blind back then?" Olivia considered this, watching their reflection in the window. "I think we had to break to become who we are. Some transformations require breaking down before rebuilding." He touched the wooden pendant at her neck, his fingers gentle. "Like your kintsugi philosophy, making broken things beautiful. More like recognizing that they always were beautiful," she corrected softly. "The breaking just helps us see it." The evening wound down, guests departing with renewed conviction in their shared mission. As the last of them left, Olivia and James remained, sitting at the small table they'd created together. "I have something for you," she said, sliding a small box across the table. Inside was a key, crafted from reclaimed metal and wood. "What's this for?" he asked. "The future," she replied simply, "whatever shape it takes." James held the key, feeling its weight, not just metal and wood, but trust rebuilt, love redefined, possibility restored. Outside, Brooklyn hummed with life and potential. Inside, two people who had once broken each other sat surrounded by the beautiful thing they had built together, ready for whatever came next. The coffee shop would open as usual tomorrow morning, serving customers who might never know its full story. But in every reclaimed piece of furniture, every sustainable design choice, every piece of their merged lives, the story lived on, a testament to the truth that sometimes things must break apart before they can be rebuilt into something stronger, something truer, something that lasts. The end. That was a beautiful story, wasn't it? I hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your collaboration is very important to me.